Hey, how's it going, YouTube? It's your resident MISTWEAVER monk, LB Ninja7, and in today's video, we're going to be doing a full in-depth guide on MISTWEAVER monk, specifically in Raid. Now, you can take this build to Mythic Plus, but you won't have as fun of a time. There is a completely separate, very fun build for MISTWEAVER in Mythic Plus, and I highly recommend going and watching one of my guide videos or someone else's guide video. But for today's video, we're going to focus on Raid because our playstyle is way different, and our buffs recently have kind of shifted our focus. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Now, our playstyle has changed a lot, and it's primarily because of, like I said, the buffs that we've received. We've received a lot of Vivify buffs and some buffs to our Renewing Mist synergies recently. So these are our talents. This is how I like to start off guide videos. This is our general build. Now, we're going to take this build basically on 7 out of 8 of the raid bosses. The only difference in my preference is Council, because it's just an AoE cleaving damage fight. So I like to go this build with the Feline Stomp. And yeah, so that is a completely separate build for that fight. But so let's go back to our normal raid build. Now, this left side of the talent tree, this monk side, the only really important things that you need to kind of copy are these Rising Sun Kicks. You want to buff them. The improved Vivifies, you want that because that is integral to being a MISTWEAVER monk. And then just if you need these healing buffs, you would want those. But after that, you can kind of take whatever you want. It's not very integral to your MISTWEAVER playstyle. But now let's talk about the really important stuff, our MISTWEAVER talent tree. So we are very much more focused on Renewing Mist now than we have been in the past. We recently got a buff where our Rapid Diffusion Renewing Mists can be extended with Rising Mist. So that just allows us to get a lot more Renewing Mists out and keep them out more at any given point. And then also we've gotten a lot of Vivify buffs recently. So Vivify will be hitting harder. Vivify cleaves off of Renewing Mist. So it's just all in all, our focus has really shifted to that playstyle. So in this build, some notable things is we're going to be buffing ourselves a lot. So we have this random Shao's Lesson, which is a new buff, but we do want to build around it. Now, since we can't play around which buff we're going to get, we can build around that. I'll get into that in just a second. But we are also going to be secret infusing ourselves. Now, I'll go ahead and spoil it. The best buff that you can give yourself with both of these is Haste. Now, Haste just scales really good with us being a hot class, but also it just allows us to get more casts off, which is very good, especially since our Renewing Mist can only last a certain amount of time. We want to fit as many Vivifies in that little window as possible. So, some other notable things are the Chi-Ji. These Chi-Ji talents, and now I've made a completely different video about Chi-Ji. I highly recommend going and watching that. I'll try to remember to leave that down in the description below. But Chi-Ji is its own little play style, and once you have Chi-Ji out, you kind of shift your whole focus to Chi-Ji, but don't disregard your Renewing Mists. So that's that. Let's go ahead and jump into the stats. So our stat focus, now mine are still a little off. I still have not really adjusted fully by getting better gear equipped, but our stat focus is 100% into Haste. If you get a piece that is 400 Haste and then nothing else, you equip that piece because Haste is that important. Why? Like I said earlier, it is very strong just with what we want to be doing. Oh, I have wrong piece equipped. It's just really strong with what we want to be doing, but also it scales off of the best Shao's Lesson buff. Now, if you read these buffs, one of them, which is the third one down, Lesson of Fear, that is our strongest buff. It gives us 25% haste. So, I ask you, if I have 24% haste, and I buff myself and get 25% haste, how much haste do I have? If you answered 49, you're wrong for some reason, because it scales off of our haste. I don't know the math. I'm not smart enough to do that. I probably could figure it out, but hopefully I get it here. That would be clutch. No, I got the crit one. The crit one's really strong too, but it scales. So it would go up to something like 53 or 55%. And if I had 30% haste, it would go up to like 60 something. So it scales based on how much haste you have, which is absolutely insane. Now, I also want to talk about the secret infusion buff. Because it scales, because the Shao's Lesson of Fear scales off of our haste, if we give ourselves a haste buff before we give ourselves this buff, if we get Lessons of Fear, it will also be affected by that. So if we cast either Renewing Mist or Essence Font with our Thunder Focus Tea, then we'll be giving ourselves a haste buff, and then if we get that haste buff, it'll just increase. So it just goes wild. It really goes wild. You get so much haste. So that is kind of the newer synergies. So hopefully you guys kind of understand all the basics, and I eventually will make a very basic Mistweaver guide for someone who is just starting. But since this is a raid video, I feel like I can kind of start a little further in depth. So the play style has kind of shifted, like I said. I'm not going to go over the Chi-Ji window because that I'll touch on it, but that has its own video, like I said. But we're going to be talking about our simple rotation. So, like always, we are running Ancient Teachings. So we want to make sure that we have that buff up constantly. As you notice, we are not running Feline Stomp, so we cannot apply it that way. So we only have Essence Font to apply that. So we have our Ancient Teachings. We prioritize Rising Sun Kick and then Blackout Kick. Obviously, we want to play off that because we get mana back with Spirit of the Crane, and we can also reset the cooldown of Rising Sun Kick if we're lucky. But as you see, I'm about to lose that buff, and we press Essence Font. You do Essence Font basically on cooldown because it is such a strong hot. But all of that is new, or not new, so all of that we are used to. Where does this change? And it changes with Rapid Diffusion. So since our Rising Sun Kicks and our Enveloping Mists are going to be applying Renewing Mists, we can really get a lot of Renewing Mist out, and then that will really up Vivify on our chain of command. So it'll make us prioritize Vivify a lot higher than normal or than we used to. So we're going to be doing our basic Mistweaver stuff, our Essence Font, we're Ancient Teachings, we're applying Renewing Mist to things whenever we kick or whenever we Rising Sun Kick. We're going to be keeping these Renewing Mists off cooldown. And then after we have a couple of Renewing Mists out, we're just going to spam Vivify until a couple of them fall off. And that's the very simple way to put it. But that's our rotation outside of our cooldowns, is we want to be doing our basic Ancient Teachings window of just Rising Sun Kick as many times as we can. But then once we've stacked up a couple of Renewing Mists everywhere, and once our Thunder Focus Tea and Rising Sun Kick are off cooldown, we want to be pressing Vivify because that is the best button at that time, since we have it cleaving on more members than we used to, because now that hot can be extended, and since Vivify is buffed, it will just do a lot more healing. So that is our basic rotation. I really quickly want to say, if you have the buff, the Instant Vivify buff, active, you press it. If you are too lazy to pull your mouse over to your healer frames, then just press it on yourself. Like if I just press Vivify, I just press it on myself. You just got to use that at least on cooldown, the Instant Vivify. But we are also just going to be pressing Vivify a lot more often. So for those of you guys that like ranged Mistweaver or miss those days, this can be a little reminiscent of that, but we are still very much in melee. We're still very much a Fist Weaver in raid. So hopefully that clears up some of the changes. Next up, I really quickly want to talk about something that I said in the past, which is that we are haste main stat and then mastery secondary stat. That has really changed. So since we're getting more value outside of our Chi-Ji windows now, since our Vivify, since we can play around Vivify a lot harder and our hots a lot harder, we don't have to really rely on the power of Chi-Ji and those mastery procs that we're going to be getting in that. So we actually won't crit as our secondary stats. So think back in Shadowlands where you would just primarily focus crit. It's not like that anymore. We're primarily focusing haste as much as we can get, and then we're going to pump the rest into crit. So ideally every item has haste, and then ideally about 80% of your items have crit, and then the rest have mastery, and then we kind of leave verse to the wayside. But yeah, that is the build, and that is the very, very general play style. Obviously, I shouldn't have to tell you guys when to use your raid cooldowns, because that is kind of up to your raid leader, hopefully, or if you're pugging, basically you just use Chi-Ji when there's a lot of damage coming out over a longer period of time, or on cooldown if it's a longer fight, and if you can get away with that, because that'll do a lot more healing over the fight, and then revival when there's big smack damage. And that is the most general, quickest guide. I know you guys have kind of crucified me in the past for making a 45-minute guide. So I wanted to make this quick. So really quick, let's go back over it. Our priority, let me make a priority list. Renewing Mist at the top. We do not want to set at 2 charges of Renewing Mist. We want to at least be at 1, ideally have them all out. Have this one ticking on cooldown instead of both of them ticking on cooldown. Next up is our Ancient Teachings. We want that off cooldown. Next up is the Instant Vivify. We do not want to sit on that Instant Vivify basically ever. And then next up would be Rising Sun Kick. And from there you can kind of fill in the blanks. I do quickly want to also talk about our healing window. I know I said to make this quick, but whenever you're about to pop Chi-Ji, which you want to have the most amount of stats as possible going into that window, what I would recommend is either Thunder Focus Teeing an Essence Font or Renewing Mist. So Thunder Focus Tea, and we'll do a Renewing Mist to give us that haste buff, and then we're going to Xiao's Gift, hoping to get that haste, but any of them's good, and then you go into your Chi-Ji, and then you do your Chi-Ji window. So try to get up to 3 kicks, and then Enveloping Mist as often as possible. But as you see, I'm falling behind on that. But also, I really quickly want to say, now that we're in our Chi-Ji window, and we're pressing a lot more kicks and a lot more Enveloping Mists, we're going to get those free Renewing Mists out. So that really makes Vivify nice to press during Chi-Ji. So how that works is during Chi-Ji you can get a couple of kicks and punches out, and then apply a couple of Enveloping Mists, and then you can stop and press Vivify like once or twice, and then get back to that Chi-Ji rotation, and you will get a ton of healing. I mean, we are healing a lot right now, but it's very high execution. So hopefully this guide at least just cleared up some of your suspicions on how you should be playing the class. I am LB Ninja 7, and I make Mistweaver content, and I really appreciate you guys watching this far. So if you like this video, make sure and hit like to show me that you like it. And if you like my content, then hit subscribe so you see the next video that I post. Got a lot of videos in the works, and I'm not going anywhere. I love making YouTube videos, and I love that you guys support it. So thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for hitting subscribe and liking and commenting down below. Let me know what you guys think, if I missed anything very important. I try to just go over the basics, but I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.